Sean, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we'll be discussing data privacy and some of the big changes that might be happening in 2024. But first, could you tell me about the current issues around data privacy that help bring Skyflow's Data Privacy Vault as a service into creation? What are the top 2 or 3 biggest issues around data privacy that you see like right now? And to that end, how does something like Skyflow's Data Privacy Vault as a service, API, and products like this work to secure some of those issues?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 like big problems that we see. They're like big historical problems.
Okay.
One is that historically, it's been very, very hard to essentially keep data secure, but still usable. So there's always this like trade-off, right? Where like we can apply techniques like encryption, even techniques like tokenization and so forth, and they work for certain use cases, but they break a lot of things that we actually knew with the data. So if we encrypt the data, then it breaks things like search or analytics and so forth. So then we need to decrypt the data to actually make it usable, and then essentially we're exposing it to risk. So that's been a really hard problem to figure out, is how do you essentially keep data protected while actually keeping it usable for various workflows. And then the other big problem that I see, which is essentially like what I call like a PII sprawl problem, or sensitive data sprawl problem. So what ends up happening, especially in a modern system, it doesn't even need to be that big. What we end up doing is we end up with a bunch of copies of the data. So if we think about collection of someone's information during an account signup form, it's not like that data just goes from the account signup form, arrives in the database, it's only ever going to live in the database. It actually touches all these different systems along the way, being passed through the API gateway. Eventually it's going to end up in the database. We're probably going to end up with a copy in like a warehouse or analytics store of some sort. Along the way, we might log it in various log files, the backups of all these different systems. So instead of having one copy of that data, we might actually have like hundreds or thousands of copies of the data. Right. It's a little bit like if you took, your passport, and instead of having a copy of it that you have in a secure location in your home, you created like 10,000 copies of it and put them all over the place. And then you tried to like protect those places. That's a much harder problem to solve. But that's basically the problem that we've created for ourselves in most modern systems, especially in the world of cloud, where we can just kind of like pick our pieces and plug them together and stuff like that. So when we end up having to do there, historically, is we try to, we either build like a security fence around that, and then everybody that's within the fence, we just trust that, hopefully they should be there and they're doing the right things.
And that's insiders, right.
Yeah, and that's, not a very effective means to actually lock down these systems. You're going to end up accidentally exposing someone, or even, have a bad actor or someone penetrates the fence and then they have access to everything. Or you end up trying to kind of plug holes in this like leaking dam in these different places. So you end up with like one tool that provides security and governance and a bunch of other things to like your database, but then you need another tool over here and another tool over here. And then that then becomes like a huge like operational nightmare. So those have been the 2 fundamental problems that I see organizations really struggle with. And the way that we've approached that at Skyflow, and this comes from, like I mentioned, a lot of our background in data, like our CEO and co-founder came from Salesforce, came from Oracle, and he saw companies struggle with this over and over again. He thought about it for a long time. And what he was able to sort of, like one of the key innovations that we came up with was figuring out a way to allow us to essentially keep data secure while still usable. And we created a technology that we call polymorphic data encryption, which has essentially similar characteristics that you would want from something like homomorphic encryption, which is homomorphic encryption is like the holy grail of encryption, where you can keep everything encrypted, do whatever operations you want on it, but it's just not performant. And with basically polymorphic data encryption, we've been able to give you the same value that you get from homomorphic, where we can keep everything encrypted, but still allow you to do operations and use the data. But by restricting the problem space to essentially the PII, it becomes a solvable problem. And that is a big part of our secret sauce. So we can essentially solve this, false dichotomy of essentially usability and privacy. And then the other thing is around the sprawl problem. How do you solve that? Well, that's really where the heart of this idea of isolation, protection, and governance, which a data privacy vault gives you. There's other companies that have essentially created or innovated similar technology. Companies like Google, Netflix, Apple were some of the pioneers of this. And essentially what they recognize, the same way that people have recognized that, encryption keys, secrets, identity don't belong like in our database or source code because these are kind of special. We need specialized technology for them. The spirit of the data privacy vault is also recognizing that PII is also a special type of data. The rules of engagement for it are different in terms of who needs access, what they need access for it, how they perform operations on it, how often they need to touch it. So we need specialized technology developed for essentially the isolation, protection, and governance of that data, while essentially de-scoping other systems from touching it. So instead of storing this information within your database or in your data warehouse, what we're doing is we're essentially transforming the sensitive data into a non-sensitive version of that data that then you can still, because of polymorphic data encryption, it's not going to break your workflows and types of things that you need your data. So essentially what we're trying to give you is all the things that you want to do with sensitive customer data without you actually being exposed to seeing the underlying data.
Have you seen Work Bites, the new security awareness training series from Infosec? Our team produced this series with 3 E's in mind, making security awareness training entertaining, engaging, and educational. Just go to infosecinstitute.com/free to learn more about this hilarious office comedy. And hey, let us know what you think about it.